Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge. Today I am so excited to be bringing you all of my 6-star reads so far in 2023. So I usually do this in June or July. This year, I feel like I'm on top of it. Also, I feel like last year I didn't have that many 6-star books by the middle of the year. So I didn't, I was a little less urgent to get to this video, but I actually have 11 books that I have given 6-star reads. Now, if you're new here and you don't know what I'm talking about with a 6-star and it's like, Jen, what's wrong with the 5-star scale? What does this mean? What's all of this? So I made a video a couple years ago now, and I will maybe remember to take it, I'm not sure, but where I discuss my rating scale and how I came to be. I am someone who I rate very generously. I want to be able to give a book 5 stars if it is good and it gives me everything that I need. And I wanted to have something that was above that I could give to my absolute favorites. And so I had actually at one point seen another booktuber who had a 6-star scale as well. And I decided to do that. So yes, on my Goodreads, it will say that a book has 5-star, but I always put my rating and my spice rating for a book. Even if I don't write anything else about the book, I try to put my star rating and my spice rating, because I do half stars, except for once we get to 5, I do up to 4.5, 5, and then a 6-star read if it's an absolute favorite. And my, reasons for giving them that high of a star is usually because it was very emotional for me. It didn't have unnecessary third act breakups. Like if it is there, it's there for a reason and it exists and it was laid out well. It has all the swoon. It usually has a pretty good spice and not just a gregarious spice just thrown in there. It really needs to pack an emotional punch. So just everything hits me just perfectly. And those are my 6-star books. They're usually the books that I'm talking about the most, that I put pictures up everywhere of, that you probably already know every book that's on this list already, but that's okay. We're going to go through it. We're not going to go directly in order with how I gave them 6 stars. I have them kind of grouped in a few ways. I have them grouped sort of by fantasy, historical, and then contemporary is how I have this kind of separated. So we're going to go through it like that, and hopefully this one won't be too long, because since they are 6-star reads, I've already talked about them multiple times, but I just wanted to put them all in one video so you know which books are so far in my running for my favorites of the year. Because also something that I've done for 3 years so far and will be doing for again this year is that in December of every year I reread my favorite books, and then I rate them using a different scale. So these are all books that I've already given 6 stars, and then I rate them even more on other categories and give them a score of 1 to 50, plus I have some bonus points wedged in there as well that help me decide my favorites. And this has been very helpful to me because of the fact that I'm very generous with my ratings. Because back in, I think, 2019, 2020, I realized that I had given 110 books a 5-star rating. That was the year that I read 720 books. So as you can tell, it's a pretty good, I'm pretty generous with those, but it made it very difficult to narrow down my favorites. So this is what we do now. So anyway, let's go ahead and start with the contemporaries that I have given 6 stars to, and there have been 3 of those so far. So we will start with Powerless by Elsie Silver. This is book 3 in the Chestnut Spring series. So the first thing that I want to say about this is that of the books I'm talking about today, I think this one I maybe rated a 6-star but mostly because it felt so good to read another one of Elsie's books. It always does when I read one of her books. And I feel like she told the story very well, but there were some things that now when I lay out all 4 of the books, and we're going to talk about another one very soon, I feel like this one sits closer to how I feel about Flawless and doesn't compare the same to Heartless and Reckless, which are, again, also books that I've given 6 stars by her. Where Flawless was a 5-star, it was a solid 5-star. It worked really well for me, but it didn't quite push me over the edge the way that Heartless did. And Powerless, I definitely teared up quite a few times, and I really enjoyed Sloane's journey to who she would be. And I love the childhood friends. It says they're 2 broken hearts and 1 impromptu road trip to get away from everything. and they're dealing with, they've gotten some bad news about Bo. They're really afraid that, Bo is dead or been captured or really injured, and she has just run away from her wedding. She's a runaway bride scenario, and they go on this road trip together. And I really enjoyed literally their physical journey and their emotional journey. And I love that Sloane really called him out on the fact that he kept her waiting so long. And it's like, you were going to let me marry another man and you were never going to say anything. And if I hadn't have found out that this man had cheated on me, you were going to let me be in an unhappy marriage when you had these feelings. And granted, it can't all be put on him because she's responsible for her own feelings too, but she has felt powerless. And so I really liked this journey for her and how it worked out. But again, when I now compare it to all four, having read 4 books in this series, I think that it's more of a 5-star than a 6-star for me. Still obviously strong, still not a ton that I would tick off of it, but there are just books in the series that are very clearly 6 stars to me. And this one's more of a 5, but we'll see when I reread it, because I will reread it. I'll listen to the audiobook. I will rank it, with my feels, and we'll see if that's really how it is. But I still don't have huge criticisms. It's just my 6-star rating scale is so much about gut feeling. And that's a lot of times why when I initially read a book, I'm like, that was a 6-star read. This is where it's at. But over time and over reading other books by the author, I might change a little bit, right? And again, that's another reason why in December I reread all of my 6-star books to see which ones it was a gut impulse to give a 6-star because of maybe a really powerful end scene or really beautiful I love you, whereas maybe the book as a whole isn't quite there. I hope that makes sense. I know I'm over talking already, but part of the reason I'm doing that is because we're now also going to talk about Reckless, which has now released for everyone seeing it. I still don't have my physical copy yet, even though I pre-ordered it by 2 weeks. And there's people who only bought it the day it came out. They got it before me, and it pisses me off, but it's okay. It's okay. But I should have my physical book on Tuesday, but I didn't want to wait to film this video, so we're filming it. But Reckless, which is book 4 in the Chestnut Spring series, just came out. And this book for me is kind of why I think Powerless is more 5 than 6. Because Reckless just completely took me out. And I've said now in multiple, in my review and in multiples, that I even think I like it better than Heartless. And I don't know why. I think it's because I didn't expect to. Whereas obviously I had high hopes. But the tropes in this one are not my go-to tropes. I don't love a secret baby. I don't always love a bitchy heroine who everyone sees as the hard ass. Sometimes I do. I have softened to that trope more and more, but I just wasn't sure how I would feel. And the biggest one, and I say this with pride, I in my heart had Winter pegged to be with someone else. I thought Winter would be with someone else. And so when it was first announced who her partner actually was and what was going on, I was really oh, I wanted it to be this. And so I definitely was stuck in my own head about it. But here's the thing. Elsie knows her characters better than any of us could know, and she had such a beautiful love story planned for Theo and for Sloane, or for Theo and Winter. And so from how this one night stand happens to how she ends up as a single mom and why he isn't involved, it worked for me. I mean, it tore my guts out. It hurt so bad. But I see how it happened. I see how Winter didn't try maybe as hard as she could have just because of the type of woman she is. And she wanted to have a baby anyway. So it was if you don't want to be involved in this, then fuck off. I'll do it by myself. And yet she isn't by herself. She isn't by herself. And watching the Chestnut Springs community and family around her. And then when Theo finds out, there's a beautiful quote, and I put this in my my review post on Instagram of for the rest of my life, I'll never forget the look of Theo's heart breaking when Theo finds out what he's missed out on so far. And that was it. My boat was sailed, the ship was on. I was this ship, I will go down with it with my whole heart and soul. And so then watching the rest of this book be, number one, Theo prove that he will be a stand-up man and he will be there. And not only will he be there for this beautiful little girl, but he's there for Winter, and she's his girl, and she will be his. He will prove it to her. And watching him do that was beautiful. And watching Winter, who, yes, we've seen her be bitchy, but for me, we are shown what those reasons are pretty early on. Like, we're even shown what those reasons are in Heartless to some degree. We start to see softer pieces of her, and we see what she's been through, and we see how she's always been pulled between her mom and her dad and feeling like she needed to be on her mom's side, and then her mom being so manipulative and really like separating her from her sister and like keeping her from that what could have been a really beautiful relationship all these years, and seeing her come back into that and be welcomed in to the Eaton family, you know, and then just all this beautiful stuff, and watching her grow and watching her be a great mom. Like, there are some tender, sweet moments of her being a mom, both on her own and both like showing Theo how she's a mom, that just were so poignant and beautiful. And it just completely won me over to Winter as well. So I was completely, like I said, just laid out for Theo and Winter. And this book, there isn't a thing I critique in this book. There isn't for me. Yeah, Secret Baby is the trope that I am consistently most worried about. And though the scenario is a bit frustrating, as they all are, Secret Baby is always frustrating. That's what the conflict is. But it also is handled like very quickly. Like, we get through all of that and we get to the point where Theo knows like very quickly. And there isn't a lot of like accusation or anger or back and forth about that either. We move on from it and we're like, well, now we're here and I want to get to know my daughter. And we do that. And I think it's done very well. So, one of my favorites of the year for sure. We'll see where it lands, because Heartless was my favorite book of 2022. And like I said, I think I like Reckless more than that. So we'll see what happens. But honestly, we have some heavy hitters. So the last contemporary book that I want to mention is, of course, The Right Move. And already, this is why I have to reread these books. I'm very excited for the audiobook for this to be out. That's the thing too. A lot of these books that I love, there will be audiobooks out by the time I get to reread them. Honestly, for all of them there will be, and it just makes it a whole other beautiful experience. But this book, of course, was highly recommended by all of my viewers. This one was a Patreon requested read. It's been long enough now that I will talk about it a bit more here. Usually when it is a Patreon choice, I keep my review secret for those, but it's been enough months now and it's on my favorites list, so it's time to talk about it. But this is one that I annotated and gave away a copy. I also had this one in my quarterly book box because people wanted my thoughts on this one. So it was so much fun to read this book, and it was everything everyone promised. Ryan Shea, he is a basketball star, he is a loving brother, but he is very closed off, he's very secretive, and when his sister Stevie asks if her friend Indy can stay with him, because she now has her boyfriend from Mile High, she's staying with him, but her friend has just broken up with, I think it was her fiance or her boyfriend, I don't know, and she doesn't have a place to stay. And also it happens to be her ex's celebrity hero too. So there's so many layers to this. Ryan agrees to let her stay with him, but he's very much like, there won't be anything going on. And Ryan is actually celibate, and he's made that decision because of some, I mean, honestly, trauma in his past. Not like trauma in like a SA type, but just like emotional relationship drama / trauma. I consider it kind of traumatic what happened to him. And watching that like play out with Indy was so beautiful. And he definitely is like pretty grumpy with her, trying to keep her on the outside, but he just can't. He slowly becomes obsessed with her. He thinks that she's so beautiful, and he just gets caught up in her orbit, and before he knows it, he's sucked in. And then there's another layer too where is basically his boss, I think it's the team manager or the team owner, I can't remember who it is, feels that he's not settled in enough. They want to see him be more settled and more like secure so that they know he'll be staying with them. And so with that, he kind of needs a girlfriend. And so Indy agrees to kind of be his fake girlfriend while they do it. But he does have some really like serious rules for it. He's like, no fake kissing, no fake touching. He's like, intimacy is all very important to me. And like, I can't even tell you how much that I loved seeing a man say that, because that's how I feel too. And so seeing him be like, it's not nothing. Sex is not nothing. You are sharing a part of yourself with someone. And those are a lot of the reasons like why he abstains, because he's like, I don't have the time or the energy for it, and so I'm not going to engage in it when I can't fully give myself. But very, very quickly with Indy, he realizes he wants to give all of himself. And his possession is exactly the kind of possessive hero that I love. The way that he appreciates her body, the way that he appreciates her, the way that he is caretaking of her even when he doesn't fully like her yet, but yet he wants to make sure she's taken care of and feels comfortable in his home, even though he doesn't even want her there. Like, he's just such a good man. And that is why there's a Ryan Shea fan club. That is why there is so much obsession over this book. It's just so well written. And this couple is so beautiful together. And this book made me smile and laugh. And also the heroine is a coda. She's a child of deaf adults. And so she has, parents who are deaf and hard of hearing, and watching how Ryan makes moves to be able to communicate with them was just panty melting and heart melting all in one. So this one will also be very, very high up on the list, I'm sure. I already can't wait to reread this one because it's so precious. It's so precious. I love it so much. Okay, so those were the contemporary ones. Let's move into the fantasy ones, because I have 4 fantasy books. So we'll actually start with 2 that I'm kind of considering as one, even though that's ridiculous because they're the size of 4 books together. But I consider this continuous story what was 6 stars for me. So I really should have grabbed the first book too. But 2 books that I gave 6 stars this year were 2 books in the War of the Lost Heart series by Carissa Broadbent. So book 2 is Children of Fallen Gods, and book 3 is Mother of Death and Dawn. I'm going to put that one down because it's the heaviest one, and I'll hold this one up, and I'll probably talk fast because this is heavy on my wrist for sure. But these were my, I read this series first before I tried anything else by Carissa Broadbent. My friends were going nuts over her books, and I was like, I want to go nuts over her books too. Let me in. And so the audiobooks for this series were available on Anyplay. But I ended up actually buying copies of them for my Audible because I want my sister to read these as well. But this is an epic story of Tisana and Max, plus another character that I don't want to say, because when you read the first book, you will have no idea that character will have a POV and will be so important. So I don't want to say it. But if you've read it, you know who I'm talking about. This involves like magic and powers, and even some like fae are involved at one point. And the first book, which I kind of have to talk about the first one to show why these, but I gave the first book 5 stars, by the way. I gave it 5 stars. These 2 were 6 stars because of the emotional hits and the reveals, and like were so powerful to me. And I know for some people these books are a slog. I get it. But the audiobooks were a fucking adventure for me. I love it. And you'll see that with a couple other books that I'm going to talk about too. Like the audiobooks can honestly push a book into 6 stars for me because performance is so important, and I just get sucked into a good performance. But also these stories are amazing. And Tisana is a sex slave in the first book, and she is trying to buy her freedom. Things don't go so well when she tries to buy her freedom, and so she is almost killed, and she's able to escape, and she goes to the orders, and she ends up with a in the first book, she ends up with a mentor named Max, who is kind of like a war veteran at this point. He's a wounded hero in a lot of ways, and he helps her hone her magic. But in doing so and helping her hone her magic, she ends up making a deal with the Order that they will be allowed to take advantage of her magic and use her as a weapon. In exchange, they will help her free her fellow slaves from what they're dealing with. And so she doesn't quite know the full bargain that she's going to be taking on, but Max does. But there's also things that keep him from sharing what he knows. It's fascinating. And also they have this beautiful slow burn romance in the first one, and then we see them together and apart and torn apart and together, and we just see their relationship build and grow through all 3 of these books. And I was just so moved by them, guys. I loved this story. You do need to read all of these in order because it's one continuous story about first first we mostly have Tasano's POV, and then we add in Max, and then we add in another POV get added through the books, and things are not what they seem. We learn and things change, and like these books were just such a ride, and I just highly recommend. And for me, I am also loving her Crowns of Nyaxia series. I really am. But the character study and the depth of like how well I feel like I know Tessana and Max is so much higher with this series. And it is like the epic fantasy series that we love. Like, that's how I feel about it. But it definitely is slow moving in parts. The reveals come in like inches and things, but it's also so fun if you can guess some of the things. Like specifically in book 2, when we were getting to the reveals at the end of this book, I was starting to have a hint about certain things were bubbling up. And my brain, like some things I was able to guess and other things I was like, how the fuck could I have guessed that? But the hints are there. The hints exist. And there's like also like dual timeline happening at certain parts. And there's some stuff that shows up in a timeline that just like clicks everything into place. And you just like, oh my God, listening to this was a ride. So I, of course, highly recommend the War of the Lost Hearts series by Carissa Broadbent. I recommend Carissa Broadbent, period. Okay? Period. All right, then we, of course, have the one that it's not fully controversial because a lot of people are loving it, but I do know that it's one of the hyped books that people all feel a certain way about it. But the way that I felt about it was a 6-star read, and that was Fourth Wing. But this is one of the books that, as I said about Powerless, this may be more of a 5-star or maybe even lower than that when I reread it, because I definitely feel like this one, when I reread it, I will definitely notice a lot more of the things that friends of mine and not friends and not friends have critiqued about it when I reread it, and it may lessen my enjoyment because, as I've shared when I've talked about this book before, I didn't even know this was fantasy romance. I'd seen it on a couple of friends' TBRs, but it didn't register with me until release day when I picked up the audiobook of this because it's narrated by one of my favorite narrators, Rebecca Soler, and I devoured this in one sitting, and it just clicked for me. It did all of the things I wanted it to do. And for some people it didn't, and I've listened to a lot of reviews where people didn't like it. I've listened to a lot where people are loving it, and for me, I still definitely love it. And in fact, the second book in this will be out this year, so that one may also be on, my second half of the list. I don't know. And the second book may make me love this one even more, or it may be less. I don't know. I'm talking with one of my friends, Jo from Not So Average Jo, who I definitely want to give credit to because she's the one who pointed this out to me, so definitely go watch her review of this book. Please do. Jo deserves so many more followers than she currently has. She is amazing and so funny. But I had been hyping this book up to her, and she also had a great time. And she also noticed some of the problem things people had pointed out, but she felt the same way as me. It's like the dragons were great. It was fun. It was horny. It was all these great things. And something else she pointed out is that there are a few fantasy series that the whole series is out now. The whole series is out now. But if you started with the first book and you read the first book in a vacuum and didn't look at any of the others, you would think that first book isn't great. And you might not even want to continue the series. But we have the benefit of hindsight with those series where we have people telling us like, book 3 is the best. You've got to keep going. And so we do. We do that. I've done that with Cressley Cole's series. I'm doing it with Sarah J. Maas series. I've even told people that about another series I'm going to talk about, Stay a Spell, where I, of course, don't think Wolf Gone Wild is bad, but Wolf Gone Wild wasn't the best book I had ever read, but I had heard even better things about book 2 and about book 3, and so you keep going, and eventually you find what you love about it. So the thing I just want people to keep in mind, if you completely hated this book, fine, don't keep going. You'll probably just get angrier about it. But also think about series where the whole series is out now, and you maybe didn't like book 1 or 2 or even 3, but then that 4th book and that 5th book are your favorite books you've read. But you couldn't have just jumped to book 4. You had to start at the beginning. And for me, I loved this. I don't need extra convincing. I loved it. But I am so fascinated to see what the arc of 5 books will be, because this is set to be a 5-book series. And if it is planned out well, there's a reason why we don't know a lot of things. There's a reason why things felt left out, and what might feel sloppy to us now would be answered later. Just to put out there. You can take that for how you feel about it because your opinions are valid. But just remember that if an author plans for there to be 5 books. They're not just like, oh, this book did good, let me write a book too. Like, if they're planned to write that many books, there are going to be things they need to keep back from you. There's going to be reveals that need to happen later on. And there's the pacing of an entire arc to remember. So that's just, I loved when Joe pointed that out, because it made me think instantly of 3 or 4 series where it took me until books 2, 3, 4 before I loved it. And that doesn't mean that all of a sudden the first book has to become someone's favorite. You know, like, I know we use the example, but like Throne of Glass, a lot of people, that's not their favorite book in the series, but you have to start with Throne of Glass. Like, you can't skip Throne of Glass. And then eventually you get later on and you understand that all of the hints were there. We just didn't know what to even look for, because we don't know that Selena is going to be Aelin, or that there is a Rowan that exists. And so we think all we have is the cards that we have, but there's more coming. So that's my little defensive fourth wing. You can take it for what you want. And you can also think that if an author didn't do a good job in the first book, why should you buy the second book? That is totally valid. But for me, I loved it. I had a great time with the audiobook. I thought that it was just getting the spicy going enough for me. I love the dragons. I love the setting. I love the school vibe and the fighting. And I loved our heroine. She was a bit too obnoxious sometimes about, like, I must do what I want to do. But I still had a great time with it. And then the other one that is like fantasy / paranormal that I have to mention is, of course, Grim and Bear by Juliet Cross. Look at this pretty pink confection of beautifulness. This is the 6th and final book in the Stay a Spell series. Although it was just announced the other day that not only are these books getting redistributed, they will be keeping their original covers, by the way. We're not losing that. They will be redistributed. There is going to be a spin-off book about the werewolves that will be coming in the near future. So how exciting. But anyway, this is about our 6th Savoy sister, Clara, and this is about Henry, our Grimlock, sad boy, tattooed bad boy, and this is their love story. And I'm not even going to go into too much depth about this one. I'm completely in love with this series. I absolutely adore it. Juliet Cross is one of the sweetest women, and she's written one of the most beautiful series that is just cupcakes and rainbows. Okay, this series is not trying to be anything overly angsty. It is what it looks like, but it is also steamy and fun, and there is a beautiful family dynamic. There isn't tension between the sisters or any backstabbing or trying to steal each other's boyfriends. It's just a beautiful series, and I'm so sad that it's done, but I can't wait for what's coming next, and I can't wait for my special editions that I ordered through the Kickstarter that costs more than my monthly rent. But we won't worry about that. All right, and now we have the final category of what my favorites are in, which is actually historical. And funny enough, I have just as many historical favorites as I do of the other ones, which, I mean, I guess it's not a surprise. So I have 4 historicals that were 6 stars this year. So unfortunately, most of them are shiny, which I'm like, why are we doing shiny books? But there is The Duke Gets Even. This was book 4 in the Fifth Avenue Rebels, and this was my favorite one by miles, and that's why I gave it a 6 star. Okay, I absolutely adored Lockwood and Nellie, and I loved how they met and then how they are off on the wrong foot once they find out who each other is. And I love the pining that's happening by Lockwood and Nellie feeling like she just needs to stay away from him. He's going to be bad. I'm not going to fall for this Duke. And he needs an heiress who's not only has the money, but is also respectable to save his family back in England. But he just keeps being drawn to Nellie, and he can't stay away. And look at how hot this cover is. This book has just a little bit of kinkiness happening in it. It is naughty and delicious. And also their romance just made my heart ache. Their romance absolutely made my heart ache. It's so beautiful. I read an arc of this one, and I just knew it was perfection. So I can't wait to read what Joanna Shu puts out next, either in her mafia books or in her historicals, but I adored this book. There was also Hyacinth by Minerva Spencer, aka SM La Violette, and this was book 2 in the Bellamy sisters. This one is about, obviously, Hyacinth, who is going undercover as a man to play cards and try to earn money to help get her family out of debt. Not just to get her family out of debt, but also to provide a life for her and a friend of hers, because once she earns enough money for her family, she's planning to disappear and go live with her friend, and live out his last days with him, because she does believe her friend may die soon. there's a dog that should not be outside barking constantly and it's driving me nuts. Anyway, but then we have the Duke, Sylvester Derrick, the Duke of Chatham, who is really bored with his life. He's a widower. His first wife was quite the craze. And he's been through a lot. And so he's just trying to live out his life. And when he comes across this young whippersnapper who is obviously a card sharp and is probably going to get themselves in trouble anytime, he's even more surprised to find out this is a woman. He doesn't find out who this woman is or that she is literally like a lord's daughter, but he kind of forces her to only go play cards when he's going to be there because he wants to make sure she doesn't get hurt or get in any trouble that she can't get out of, and they start to fall for each other. And I also love this heroine is neurodivergent. She doesn't believe in love, and our hero is actually the one who falls completely in love with her and kind of has to convince her to take a chance on him. And also he could solve all of her financial issues, but you know, he has to kind of convince her to be with him type of thing. And there are some absolutely beautiful lines in this one. I really can't wait to reread it and highlight this one because I just loved how he loved her and how much he wants to care for her, but not like stifle her independence or like strip her of anything. He just genuinely didn't think that he would find a companion like her for him. And then to have her be so like stubbornly against it, I don't know, it was really beautiful. I liked watching him try to convince her. I really did, even though it hurt my heart sometimes to see it. Then we have When the Earl Met His Match by Stacey Reed. I cannot wait to reread this book, okay? I love this one so much. This one has a mute hero. It has a heroine who is pregnant and in trouble. She's on the run from her family who want to basically put her in a unwed mother's home, make her have the baby, and then give the baby away to like a baby farmer, and she refuses to do that. And so there happens to be this earl that she's been writing who she doesn't know that it's an earl, but he's been looking for a wife, and they've been kind of having this like snippy banter back and forth in these letters because he was looking for a woman that wouldn't love him but would, you know, take care of his home. And she was like, really, you're asking a woman to be yours and you're not promising to love her or any of these things. And he's like, it's a business arrangement. She doesn't need to love me. And they're going back and forth. So when she finds herself in this trouble, she decides to go to him and offer to marry him. Now, she isn't planning to hide her pregnancy because she is 5 months along. And though they can't see it like in her dress at the moment, like she isn't planning to keep it a secret from him. But once she gets there and realizes that the man she's been writing is not only handsome as hell, like beautiful, he also is the son of an earl. And the reason why he's looking for a wife is his father is dying, and his father wants him to find a wife who is upstanding in society, has no drama related to her name, and will be a good wife and mother, but that he won't love him. Like his father's the one encouraging him not to fall in love. And when his father meets this woman and sees what a spitfire she is, he's like, son, you should not marry this woman. She will cause you only drama. But he does. And he agrees that her child will be his, and that he will love the child, and that they never even have to sleep together because you're having a baby. And she's like, don't you want a child of your own? And he's like, no, we don't need it. We don't need feelings to get in the way. But that doesn't last very long. There's also some absolutely beautiful scenes of her learning sign language to communicate with him, and also him sharing music with her. That just melts my heart. It just melted me into a puddle. It was so beautiful. So I can't wait to reread this one. It's so good. And then the last book so far, that is a 6-star book for me, and this one will probably also be very, very high on the list, like so high on the list, is Forever Your Rogue by Erin Langston. And this was a book that I actually read it right after Fourth Wing. I had seen that Crystal from Crystal's Bookish Life was loving this book and had given it 6 stars. And when I finished Fourth Wing, I was really afraid of a book slump because I was like, oh man, I'm afraid that nothing else will live up to Fourth Wing. So I read this one right away, and I, number one, cried multiple times in this, but I also was just so won over by Nate, and I was so won over by Cora and her children. And this one is a widowed mother who has just made it through a year of mourning. She has 2 young children, like really little children, and her husband's family is trying to take them away from her. And so she enlists her friend's rascal of a brother to be her fake fiance for the summer to hopefully convince this family, the family members, that she's going to have another husband who will look after the kids. But she doesn't quite think that through all the way, so we definitely see how it unravels. And Nate is very reluctant to do this, but as soon as he gets there, and not only is spending time in forced proximity with Cora, pretending to court her, you know, and like be her fiance, he falls for these children, and he falls for them so hard. And the line that I always bring up that completely solidified my feelings about this book is actually in the epilogue of this book. And he's looking at his 4 children. The 2 that he had with Cora, and the 2 that made him a father. And those are his adopted kids. And that just sums up everything that I'm looking for a romance where someone is taking on children that aren't their own. I just love it. I was completely sold. I was completely won over for Nate and Cora. So I can't wait to reread this one. This one's getting an audiobook. So I can't wait to reread that and just highlight the absolute hell out of this book because it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So anyway, those are all of my 6-star reads so far this year. Let me know if you've read some of them and what are your faves. If you would like to get a copy of any of these books, I do have links down below, my affiliate links with Amazon if you want to get yourself a copy. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.